When you're dealing with someone who thrives on admiration, flattery, and the constant spotlight, the most powerful move you can make is to pull the plug on that supply. Attention is their fuel. It's not just about being seen, it's about being admired, envied, and talked about. Take that away, and they begin to crack, because without an audience, there's no performance, and without performance, there's no control. Narcissists aren't just addicted to compliments, they are addicted to relevance. They need to feel like they matter more than anyone else in the room. Every nod, every like, every text reply within 10 seconds, those little things feed the fantasy that they're at the center of your world. The more you react, the more you're handing them control, and control is what they crave. So if you want to cut them where it hurts, go silent, go still, go invisible. That doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become strategic. You stop feeding into their antics. You don't respond to the bait. You don't take the call just because they blow up your phone. You don't answer the text immediately just because it's written in all caps. You train yourself to stop reacting on command. That's how you break the cycle. Even when they push harder, because they will push harder, you remain unshaken. Because here's the reality, the second you show emotion, they've got you. If you show anger, they'll spin it into proof that you're obsessed. If you cry, they'll call you weak. But if you give them nothing, no smile, no glare, no response, you become untouchable. They can't play a game you've walked away from. Silence isn't weakness, it's dominance. It's saying, you no longer have access. And that drives them insane. They'll start to escalate, maybe even publicly. They'll try to provoke you, triangulate you with others, maybe even smear your name. But the moment you respond, you've stepped back into their arena, so you don't. You let them spiral on their own. When you're not impressed by their accomplishments, they panic. When you're not affected by their insults, they lose control. When your life continues to thrive without them, it dismantles the illusion they've built, that they're necessary, irreplaceable, or superior. You remove the stage, the lights, the crowd, and all that's left is a person who's terrified of not being seen. Most people misunderstand what starving a narcissist of attention really means. It's not about revenge, it's about refusal, refusing to participate in the false reality they've created, refusing to prioritize their ego over your peace, refusing to be manipulated by their constant need for affirmation. Because at the end of the day, narcissists aren't powerful without permission. They don't exist in a vacuum. They require an audience. Your job is to step out of the front row, turn your chair around, reclaim your focus, your time, your energy. You stop clapping. You stop watching. You stop feeding the monster they've built around themselves. Boundaries are not requests. They are not suggestions. They are not negotiable. When you're dealing with someone who manipulates, distorts, and invades, boundaries become your lifeline, and not just soft lines in the sand, but concrete walls reinforced with action, not emotion. Because when someone constantly pushes, prods, and tests your limits, they're not confused, they're calculating, they want to see how much they can get away with. Your job is to show them nothing. People with inflated egos see boundaries as insults. To them, it's a challenge, a dare. You say no, they push harder. You step back, they step in. That's exactly why your boundaries need teeth. You don't just say what your limits are. You enforce them, every time. Without emotion, without warning shots, with consistency. You don't scream. You don't plead. You act, because the second they realize your line won't move, they either back off or expose themselves trying to bulldoze through it. It starts with clarity. You need to know what your non-negotiables are, not just in theory, in practice. What behaviors will you no longer tolerate? What lines will you no longer let people cross, even subtly? Because narcissistic personalities don't often go for big violations. they chip away. A sarcastic comment here, a dismissive look there, a conversation that turns into a monologue about them again. They test you in small ways to see how much disrespect they can slip in before you notice. That's where most people fail. They let the little things slide, and that sends a signal. You can be tested. Once that window opens, it doesn't close. But when you have unshakable boundaries, even the smallest violation gets a response, not a reaction, a response. Calm, firm, clear. You don't explain your worth. You don't justify your space. You hold it quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. What people don't always understand is that strong boundaries aren't about controlling others. They're about controlling your access. You're not telling someone what they must do. You're telling them what you will do if they cross the line. If they lie, you stop engaging. If they gaslight, you end the conversation. If they disrespect, you walk away. No drama, no speech, just action. That's when they start to realize they can't play the usual games with you. They'll try to guilt trip you, make you feel cold, or accuse you of being unreasonable. That's part of the script. Stay detached. You don't justify taking care of your mental and emotional space, not to anyone, and definitely not to someone who benefits from your confusion. When your boundaries are clear and backed by action, you stop being easy to access. You stop being easy to exploit. You stop being convenient, and that's when the dynamic shifts. Strong boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're doors with locks, ones you control. You decide who enters, how long they stay, and under what terms. And when someone proves they can't respect those terms, you don't argue. You close the door, because respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you demand without raising your voice. The moment you show emotional volatility, they've won. That's how the game works. They bait, you react, and the cycle feeds itself. But when you stay emotionally neutral, when you don't flinch, don't rage, don't beg, you cut off their access to your internal world. And for someone who thrives on emotional control, that's intolerable. You have to understand emotional reactions aren't just fuel to them. They're evidence, proof that they can get to you, that you're still on the hook, that they still matter. Whether you're angry, heartbroken, or defensive, it tells them you're engaged. So they'll poke where you're sensitive. They'll provoke with precision. They'll twist your words until you're explaining yourself in circles. That's not confusion, it's control. And when you learn to sit in silence, to observe without jumping into the chaos, you remove the power dynamic they depend on. Staying emotionally neutral doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't leak. You don't hand over your reactions for someone else to manipulate. You regulate, you internalize, you assess, and then you respond, if necessary, on your terms with intention. Because control isn't about dominance over others. It's about mastery over yourself. In any interaction with a manipulator, neutrality is your greatest weapon. They can't anchor into you if you don't anchor back. No wide eyes, no defensive posture, no raised voice. You meet provocations with stillness. You give their drama nothing to bounce off. You let their emotional outbursts echo into silence. And when they accuse you of being cold or heartless, you already know the truth. Emotional detachment isn't cruelty, it's strategy. This doesn't mean you become numb. It means you become disciplined. You don't walk into emotional ambushes. You don't justify your boundaries with emotion. You don't get pulled into the blame game or the back and forth or the guilt trips designed to disarm you. You ground yourself in logic, in self-respect, in the clarity of who you are and what you stand for. Emotional neutrality is especially powerful in moments of confrontation, when they expect you to break, when they throw their sharpest words, their dirtiest tactics, their most personal attacks, and you give them nothing but a steady tone and direct eye contact. It shakes them. They don't know what to do with someone they can't control. It disrupts their entire method of operation. They want chaos. You give them calm. They want tears. You give them silence. They want a fight. You give them stillness. This mindset takes training. You don't get there overnight, but the more you practice holding your emotional ground, the harder it becomes for anyone to move you. You start to recognize what's bait and what's truth. What's manipulation and what's a real conversation. You separate signal from noise, and in doing that, you take back the power of your own emotional space. Because once you stop reacting to their storms, they're left yelling into the wind. Nothing unsettles a manipulative or self-absorbed person more than watching someone they once controlled, dismissed, or diminished evolve into someone untouchable. When you outgrow them, not just physically remove yourself, but mentally, emotionally, and energetically elevate beyond their reach, you deliver a blow they can't recover from. Not because you hurt them directly, but because you proved they were never as significant as they believed. Narcissistic personalities want you stuck. They want you doubting yourself, questioning your worth, looking to them for permission. It's not about loving you. It's about owning you. Your stagnation is their comfort zone. Your confusion keeps them in power. So the moment you begin rising, the moment you invest in your growth, focus on your purpose, and build a life they're not centered in, you break the unspoken contract they built, that you would always orbit around them. Growth in this context is not about revenge. It's not even personal. It's about returning to yourself, the version of you that doesn't shrink, that doesn't seek validation from someone who weaponizes affection. That doesn't beg to be seen. It's about real independence, psychological, emotional, financial, spiritual, and when you begin to grow in those areas, the space between you and them becomes undeniable. They'll feel it before you even say a word. The energy changes, the dynamic shifts. You stop engaging in the small manipulations. You stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. You stop chasing their approval. That alone is threatening, because if you no longer need them, they no longer control you. And if they can't control you, their presence loses value. That's a reality they're not equipped to handle. Outgrowing someone doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. You stop sharing every detail of your life. You stop reacting to their provocations. You start surrounding yourself with people who operate on a higher level. People who value depth, accountability, truth. You spend more time in environments where your peace isn't constantly disrupted, where your worth isn't up for debate, and you stop explaining yourself because you realize real confidence is quiet. They may try to pull you back. They'll remind you of who you were when you were under their thumb. They'll provoke nostalgia, guilt, even jealousy, but you don't owe them access to your progress. You don't owe them front row seats to your transformation. They only knew the version of you that tolerated their chaos. They don't get to meet the version that healed from it. What they hate most is that your growth isn't performative, it's authentic. It's not about showing off. It's about building a life so stable, so clear, so focused that their presence no longer fits. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. You don't engage in their narratives. You don't participate in their games. You've simply moved on, and in doing so, you've dismantled the illusion they tried so hard to maintain. Because when you evolve and keep evolving, they become a chapter you've read, understood, and outgrown without needing to reread again. When someone consistently manipulates, dominates, or distorts reality, they do it with one goal: control. They want the upper hand, they want a reaction, they want the emotional advantage. But when you learn to mirror their behavior, calmly, consciously, and without emotion, you take away the very edge they rely on. Not to stoop to their level, but to show them that you're fluent in the game they're playing and simply no longer participating as prey. Mirroring isn't mimicking, it's a tactical choice. You're not being petty or reactive. You're matching tone, pace, energy, and strategy, with full awareness and complete detachment. You watch how they deflect accountability, how they spin blame, how they avoid direct answers, how they test emotional boundaries. And instead of calling it out or challenging it with outrage, you hold a mirror up to it neutrally. They deflect, you redirect. They avoid responsibility, you disengage from the conversation. They withhold, you withhold. But you do it without attitude, without sarcasm, without emotional weight. You let your behavior become the reflection of theirs. This makes them uncomfortable because it interrupts the script. They're used to emotional imbalance. They're used to provoking chaos while they remain cool. The moment you become as unreadable and calm as they are pretending to be, they start to lose footing. They expect you to defend yourself. You don't. They expect you to explain your intentions. You won't. They expect you to emotionally react. You refuse. You just mirror quietly. Strategically, when they shift blame, shift it back. Not defensively, factually. When they dodge responsibility, let the conversation end. No lectures, no pleading. When they stonewall, you stop pursuing. No chasing, no closing the gap. When they criticize you to provoke shame, mirror their tone and ask for clarity. No emotion, no heat, just questions that put the spotlight back where it belongs. The reason this works is simple. It forces accountability without confrontation. It exposes patterns without saying a word. It makes their tactics ineffective. You're not trying to win. You're not trying to hurt. You're just refusing to play their way. And that drives them insane. Because once they realize they can't get an emotional payoff from you, their usual tools fall flat. This approach also gives you the upper hand without becoming cruel or vindictive. You're not escalating. You're not lowering your standards. You're just showing that you're no longer easy to manipulate. You're no longer emotionally available for someone else's dysfunction. And the best part, they don't see it coming. Because narcissists and manipulators rarely expect the person they once controlled to develop composure, discipline, and strategy. They expect outbursts, they expect weakness, so when you become a calm, silent mirror, they're forced to see themselves, and they hate what they see. Mirroring without emotion isn't about revenge, it's about power balance. It's about protecting your space, conserving your energy, and turning their own tactics into a lesson they can't avoid. You become unreadable, untouchable, unshakable, not by overpowering, but by refusing to react the way they've trained you to react when someone thrives on deception, control, and image management. The last thing they can handle is being truly seen. Not by being confronted, yelled at, or accused, but by being calmly, silently, and unmistakably exposed. And the most effective way to do that isn't through arguments or explanations. It's through stillness, through presence, through restraint. You don't have to scream to reveal someone's true character. You just stop covering for them. You stop reacting. You let them show everyone who they really are. The truth about manipulators is this: they work in the shadows of perception. They depend on your silence, your reactions, and your willingness to protect their image. The second you stop doing that, without making a scene, you shift the dynamic. You no longer clean up their messes. You no longer laugh at the inappropriate jokes. You don't excuse the outbursts. You don't fill in the awkward silences after they've crossed the line. You stop editing yourself to keep the peace. You allow their behavior to land where it lands, and you let people draw their own conclusions. There's nothing more destabilizing to someone who lives off their own false persona than being mirrored by someone who won't flinch. You don't roll your eyes. You don't call them out in public. You don't give them the satisfaction of a back and forth. You maintain calm, composed energy, and in doing so, you become the contrast. They unravel, you stay steady. They interrupt, you pause. They provoke, you observe. It becomes impossible to ignore who the unstable one is, and you didn't have to say a word. Silence is not weakness, it's clarity. When someone tries to gaslight you, and you respond with a slow, steady look and nothing else, it says more than any argument ever could. When they try to triangulate you, and you simply remove yourself from the situation without a speech, you shift the balance. They're expecting chaos. You give them quiet detachment, and that quiet speaks volumes. The power in exposing someone silently is that it doesn't just reveal them to others, it reveals them to themselves. When they no longer get the emotional feedback loop they rely on, they're left alone with their own reflection. When the crowd stops cheering, when the audience stops clapping, when the attention dries up, their performance falls flat. And when you're the one who exits the stage without noise, without damage, without a trace of regret, it destabilizes everything they thought they controlled. People notice the difference. They may not say it, but they feel it. The contrast between your composed energy and their escalating behavior becomes undeniable. And because you didn't force the issue, no one can accuse you of drama, revenge, or bitterness. You maintained your position, you preserved your dignity, you gave nothing they could twist or weaponize. You just stepped aside and let the truth surface naturally.